Hello everyone, I'm Václav. I work as a backend engineer in Mews, but recently I started playing around with frontend a bit, so I thought it would be interesting to share some of my thoughts here as well. I originally gave this presentation in English at a .NET conference, so that's why it's in English. I wanted to keep it simple, that's like part of the message of the presentation too. But I added some spicy front-end stuff in the middle as well, since this is a React conference after all. All right, why is it important to delete stuff? Let's see, who here likes to delete code, just in general? Okay, that's good. Deleting code is nice, it's satisfying. All right, who here has deleted a feature that was running in production? Okay, so hopefully we can make that ratio a little bit better. So why are we actually here? So we originally gave this talk here at Mews at an internal conference, and the goal is to find some topic that would connect not just engineers but also designers and product managers. Those are the people sharing the stage with me, and there isn't a lot that we can agree on, but it turns out deleting stuff is something that brings all of us together, and that benefits all of us. It's not just deleting code, but it's also deleting parts of the product and obsolete design. It's good for everybody. And it ended up being the most popular presentation because it was really the only topic that the whole room could agree on. So I kind of followed my own advice, and I deleted my other presenters from the presentation. So you're just stuck with me. So now we know why I gave this talk originally, but why are we here? But why did we go there originally? Why is it good to delete stuff? And it's all based on this simple observation that by adding something, you take something away. You can't add something for free. There's always a cost, right? It will make the system more complicated or more costly to maintain, or you will have to extend documentation. Who wants to do that? But the message is that there's always a cost to adding something. So the big one is maintenance, right? You have to maintain the features you add, even if users are not adding them. Using them. So it can be sitting there completely unused, nobody knows about it, but you still have to maintain the code. If you're migrating to a new version of a library, you still have to rewrite the code, right? You still have to keep paying for it. And at Mews, we realized that we spend about 40% of our time on keeping the lights on. That means just the base maintenance costs, just to make sure that the system is running and responding to customer tickets. That's a huge amount of just engineering effort and money in general, right? And it's not just engineering and product, but it's also customer support. They're getting a lot of tickets about things that maybe shouldn't be in the system at all, right? And as I mentioned, documentation. Whenever you have something, you have to keep maintaining the documentation as well. The other big one is that the things that you have can actually degrade the things around it, right? If you have a bad feature, it can degrade your users' trust in the other features that are actually good, but now they don't know which features are actually good in the sea of bad features. So it can really erode that trust with your users. And kind of the takeaway that we talk about is that at the end of the day, you can't please everyone, right? If you try to add features for everybody to make everybody happy, nobody will be happy in the end. And of course, complexity. We have these buzzwords that we like to talk about in Mews, like cognitive load and user disengagement. Has anybody heard about user disengagement, not engagement? Okay, we kind of invented it halfway. It's the idea that we want the users to use the product less, right? If it's good and it does automation, they don't have to spend so much time with the product. And of course, the more complicated it is, and the more features it has, the more time our users have to spend with the product. And last but not least, onboarding users and employees can take a lot more time when you have a big bloated product with features that nobody understands. So like it's not uncommon in big code bases that it can take a new engineer like half a year or even a year to get really comfortable with the code they're supposed to own and maintain. And in hospitality, where we work at Mews, that would be completely unacceptable because the average tenure is like 6 months. So by the time you learn how the system works, you would already be leaving to get a different job. And of course, this is for onboarding like your new people in your teams as well. So now it's time for the spicy takes or opinions. I originally gave this at a .NET conference, so I have some stuff about .NET, but of course I couldn't miss the opportunity to add a little bit about front-end as well. Does anybody here write some C#, or are you familiar with .NET? Or a little bit. Okay, so I'll speed run through it. The first one is all the ways that you can check for null in C#. It's quite a long list, and at first glance, it's not clear what are the differences and which ones work the same. And like even me as like an engineer who's been paid to write C# professionally, I couldn't like figure this out at first glance. So imagine new people who are trying to learn how C# works. And yeah, these things work differently because you can like overload the equals operator or the equals method. Some of them will throw a null reference exception. And then new versions of C# have these like special operators for like skipping null checks. In comparison, on the right side, you have Go. There's exactly one way to check for null. This is quite nice. So if you have a junior and senior engineer, they will write exactly the same code. And this can often lead to like completely unnecessary like debates in pull request reviews, where like somebody prefers the first way to check for null and somebody else prefers the middle way, and they will just argue for no reason. So just a simple observation based on this is that C# is quite a rich language that gets a lot of features added, like very frequently. So this is like not a very accurate metric, but just to give you at least like the scale, like the order of magnitude. Like C# and C++ get an order of magnitude more features added than Go. Like the Go team is a lot more deliberate in adding new features, maybe like too deliberate. But this is a lot to learn. Not so much for people who are experienced with C# and who learned it years ago when it was simple, and then like learned the new features over time. But for a newcomer, like this is super overwhelming. And I had to add some front-end stuff as well. So this is a low-hanging fruit, of course, equality in JavaScript. Why do we still have double equals? I know the answer is probably backwards compatibility, but still, like this is just a big hurdle that every new engineer has to go through, right? It's like a trial by fire. Like everybody has to learn this. Like even me, who was trying to learn front end as a backend engineer, I'm used to double equals from C#, right? So I thought I could write the same code in JavaScript. No. Like thankfully, we had a linter that prevents you from using double equals. But otherwise, it's super easy to make a mistake. On the right side, this thing that looks like a minefield, because it kind of is, that's the behavior of double equals in JavaScript. And it's a good example of maybe a case where trying to keep things simple can make them more complex, right? So we wanted to allow double equals to work on any types, which seems like simple. You don't have to do conversions, but in the end, it leads to this mess that really is hard to understand and more difficult than just converting the types. But as I said, this is a low-hanging fruit. This might be a more spicy take, and that's React Server Components, which is super controversial, even with experienced engineers in the world of React. I find them pretty complex, and they seem to be getting shipped as like the default way to do React now, which is pretty strange because they're not even supported in the current version of React. They're like in a pre-release version, and they might be supported in React 19, probably. But if you look at React documentation, they will recommend not to use React without a framework, and they will recommend Next.js as the way to learn React. But then you will be opting into React server components by default. And there have been questions on Stack Overflow from people who didn't even realize they were writing server components and wondering why certain things didn't work, right? So I think this is a good example of like a lot of unnecessary extra complexity, especially for new engineers, right? Like if you're new into front end, you shouldn't be forced to learn about server components as a default, especially if it's the recommended like way in the React documentation by the React team. And the other thing that makes me nervous is just putting like server code super close to client code. I can just see like all kinds of problems happening there with, I don't know, like leaking SQL or some secrets. Maybe I'm over-exaggerating, but it makes me pretty nervous. And this approach also like officially abandons the idea that React is a library, it's not a framework, when it's officially recommended to be used as a framework, right, with all these extra features. All right, back to deleting stuff. When should you actually delete stuff? There's this great quote from an engineer at Google, Hiram, who said that at a certain scale, like anything that your product offers will be used by anybody out there, like whether correctly or incorrectly. And the like most obvious time when to delete something is when it's not used, right? That's also probably the easiest. But even then, when it's completely unused, it's easy to fall into like the sunk cost fallacy, right? You spend all this effort to deliver something, to add the feature, to write the code, to go through reviews, and then now you have to spend even more time deleting it. And this often tends to be the case with like unfinished prototypes, which is the case in the graph. This is the feature that we released here at Mews at a hackathon called Leaderboard, where hotels could like compete with each other, like who does the best guest experience, who responds the most to messages, stuff like that. But after we added it, for years nobody touched it, nobody was adding features to it, nobody was maintaining it, and it turns out nobody was using it. This is like 40 clicks per day from and mostly unique users. So people were probably just bored, like casually browsing the system, seeing things to click at. This is not a very successful feature. And it's also possible for a feature to be so bad that it adds negative value, right? Like the cost of maintenance or like responding to customers can outweigh the benefit that the feature brings. And these often tend to be the places where you have the most accumulated debt, not just tech debt, but design debt and product debt. So deleting it is, of course, the easiest way to remove all that debt. All right, hopefully you're convinced that you should delete stuff. Now, how do you actually do it? And the trick is to use data against them. Of course, we often have stakeholders use data against us, right? Like this feature will bring this much monthly revenue. But we can also use data to justify deleting stuff. As I mentioned, we can look at the usage and like how much people engage with the feature. But just pure quantitative data is not enough. It's good to actually talk to the users and ask them, like, why are they using it or not using it? So in the case of the leaderboard, nobody actually responded to our emails. Nobody was using the feature. And when we deleted it, nobody cared. We received 0 complaints, which was like the first. And of course, you can start with the low-hanging fruit. Often we don't delete stuff at all. So it's nice to at least look at the most unused features and start there. Those should be the easiest. And then that should teach you how to delete the more controversial stuff. And it's also good to reframe deleting stuff, not just what you lose, but also what you gain as a result of it. So that can be like removing all the tech debt, as mentioned. You can shrink the backlog very efficiently by just deleting features that have the most bugs in them, right? That's better than fixing all of the bugs that you have there. And it's also helpful to frame deleting stuff as like enablement for adding new stuff. So I'm not saying that you should like lie to your product managers, but it's a lot more helpful to frame, hey, this new feature that you want to add will be easier to deliver if we first deprecate this other feature that has a lot of edge cases that will complicate the rollout. Like then everybody will be on board with you. And if you're also measuring things like ENPS, like employee satisfaction or user satisfaction, then this will benefit literally everybody. And that's it from me. Thank you for your attention. Here are some QR codes for like Mews developers and also I think my LinkedIn. So if you want to chat with me, go there or read some of our blogs. We write about interesting stuff. And do you guys have any questions?